Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. We are actually seeing a lot more class changes, not as many as I was hoping for, but it feels like Blizzard is drip feeding us information about patch 8.2. Honestly, this patch launched into the PTR not long ago, so we are not to expect anything major just a few weeks in. But I am hoping in the future months, and I'm kind of expecting that we'll get a lot more stuff for the patch 8.2, specifically when it comes to class changes, class tuning, and maybe even a possible class rework. Compared to Legion, we're yet to get some crazy new class changes with BFA. I'm very much hoping we are going to get something good for a lot of classes, but it looks like for the most part, Blizzard is going to keep the classes at least how they are now, playing and functioning the way they currently do. I really hope that trend changes in the future, and I will talk a bit about some of my hopes for the future of patch 8.2, but let's get on with all the buffs for the day. The first class we'll be taking a look at is Guardian Druid, and they are updating a bit more to what the Guardian Druid will be able to do. Now they'll have a Frenzied Regeneration rank 3, a passive that you'll learn at level 85. Frenzied Regen spends up to 30 additional rage to immediately heal you for up to 80% additional health. So you can spend extra rage. Let's say maybe you got a healer healing you up and you could save up a bit of rage for a dire situation. Now you can get yourself more immediate health rather than the powerful healing over time that you usually play as a druid. This heal is affected by Guardian of Elune, but it is not affected by Mastery. So this heal isn't going to scale better with your Mastery, it's just going to be a flat percentage of health. This could be good because it will allow you a bit of flexibility to play with your stats. You will need some sort of a Mastery cap for this to be good, and especially new tanks starting out in Bear, especially at level 85 and up, will have a fairly decent guaranteed 80% heal that they can play with. That combined with all the other changes Guardian Druid's already getting, with all the damage increases and cut costs on some of the rage based for abilities, it actually seems like a really solid changes to 8.2, and hopefully it will be good. Now for my own opinion, I think Guardian Druids have been definitely in the gutter for most of BFA, and hopefully patch 8.1 does this. You know, Guardian Druids are not quite as unique as some of these other tanks, like the healing of a Blood Death Knight. Not a lot of heroes can do that. Then there's Vengeance Demon Hunters of Protection, Paladins, which have a lot of utility that they can provide for the group. Paladins can basically take the damage somebody else would take and sacrifice it onto themselves, and even provide a bit of strong self-healing. They're not quite a warrior with all the different thunderstorms and big AoE damage. They're not quite as smooth on damage like a Brewmaster with Ring of Peace to be able to delay the adds from coming at you. So bears just don't have anything unique or special about them. But that's what I always like. It seems like they were always that middle ground tank that kind of dipped their toe in just about every single field. They have a bit of self-heal. They have a pretty good mitigation. They can take physical damage just fine with a master that simply makes any healing on them a little bit more effective. It's almost like they're the most flexible for any group out there. And I'm really hoping the Blizzard brings that back up from what they had in Legion into BFA. Next, we got an update to Vengeance Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter is another one of those tanks that Blizzard is trying to bring up like the Guardian Druid. With Vengeance, this is what they are doing. Metamorphosis is going to have a 50% health bonus up from 30, so it's going to give them a lot more health during meta, and now causes Shear in Metamorphosis to generate 20 additional pain and 1 additional Lesser Soul Fragment, where it generates 7 pain per second. The developers note talks about how much more self-healing this is going to do for the spec. And I kind of like it that they, instead of like, you know, just because you have Metamorphosis, you're just generating pain. Instead, your abilities that you press will generate additional pain and lesser soul fragments. Now, I do hope that this works with Fracture because that's a fun ability to use as a DH, personal opinion, but I really do like this change. Again, with all the other changes they've added to DH, it's cool that they're trying to make Demon Hunter more of a standout spec. Honestly, if I had a word with it, I feel like DHs are probably one of the most fun tanks to play. There, I said it. They don't feel like a tank when you play them. They feel like a DPS rather, with just how much damage you pump into the enemy, and then all the self-healing you do with tearing souls out of the enemy. I feel like visually and fundamentally, it just feels pretty great, feels pretty cool, and the lack of buttons that you have to play with does make it a little bit easier to start playing. Of course, it's not going to be that complexity of all the different things you could do, like with other classes, for example, but still, this feels pretty awesome. Finally, we got a change to Frost Death Knights, and it looks like it's a buff across the board. I know a lot of you guys thinking, wow, Frost Death Knight finally getting a buff. Is this exactly what we were looking for? Let's find out. Runic Empowerment has a 2.0 chance to proc per runic power spend from 1.5, so 0.5% increase. That means more runic empowerment when it comes to you playing your class and doing all the things. Frost Fever's chance to generate runic power increased to 30%. Chance that diminishes in target beyond the first, so you shouldn't be able to scale really crazy with a bunch of AoE enemies. Breath of Sindragosa now has double the usual chance to proc runic empowerment. That means a lot more obliterates to get through and a lot more abilities to press when Breath is running. Breath of Sindragosa costs now 18 runic power instead of 15. There is a developer note attached to this one. Frost was starved of resources too often, and ain't that the truth, especially when using Breath of Sindragosa. This increases Frost's rune income baseline and includes a further change that returns many extra runes while using Breath of Sindragosa. Breath builds will now be able to fill more global cooldowns with casts of Obliterate to make up for the loss of Frost Strikes. The cast of Breath itself is increased to keep its overall duration roughly unchanged. So overall, this means you are gaining more procs to get back your runes. You are going to be getting more obliterates during your Breath of Sindragosa windows. Breath of Sindragosa will actually fully replace your Frost Strikes altogether. So this should be overall an increase to the current build that a lot of Frost Death Knights, which is the only build, Breath of Sindragosa build, that everyone is running. Now, while this may be good for everybody playing Frost Death Knight or trying out Frost Death Knight, this is going to try to make him a bit more consistent. And of course, between the talent of Breath of Sindragosa that everybody explained, this is good. Where I personally don't like, and this is where I stand by myself, I don't know if any of you guys feel the same way, but I'm honestly not a huge fan of the fact that Frost is kind of forced to play Breath of Sindragosa. If you like Breath of Sindragosa, great for you. If you like the playstyle, that's awesome. But it feels too weird to me. You have a lot of other talents in a row as well. There's Breath, there's Obliteration, and there's another one that no one ever remembers that plays on cooldown reduction. And because of the way the Frost Death Knight is constructed for BFA, it almost feels like Breath is the only way to go. Like, for right now, I don't even know any other reason except maybe for some PvP situations where Obliteration could even be a decent option. There were Azeroth traits in the past that maybe let you play with Obliterate a little bit better, especially if you want to get big, chunky Obliterate damage like you used to back in Legion, back in WoD, back in Mop, back in Kata, where Frost was all about the glass cannon, massive Obliterates shattering on your enemy. But right now it's really all about little bits of damage and letting Breath kind of run on its own and obliterating back to back on the enemy and maintaining all that. I feel like Frost Death Knight needs to go through a rework. Like, if they weren't to change some of the things that I would do with the spec, first of all, why does your Frost Fever do as much damage as it does? Let's tone down the damage of your damage over time ability, leave that thing for Unholy Death Knights, and give back more damage to Obliterate for bigger, chunkier crits damage. Also, let's tone down the auto attack damage a bit. The melee damage is good. I know a lot of classes have melee damage as part of the rotation, but let's tone that down a little more to give again more damage back into Obliterates. So then you could still play Breath of Sindragosa with massive Obliterates if you choose to, but then specs like Obliteration and more could be a possibility. I think Frost Death Knights need to go through a little bit of rework, or if Blizzard does want him to use Breath of Sindragosa, it almost feels like it should at this point be part of the spec. It's a talent, I know, but it is used everywhere. There's almost no situation where you don't use Breath, so what if Breath became more of a baseline? And then you could fill the talent option for Breath of Sindragosa with a different ability, something that actually changes your playstyle and gives you variation. Now, I know Breath of Sindragosa and Obliteration might be really strong together, but I'm pretty sure Blizzard could come up maybe with more passive abilities that just simply affect or change your rotation ever so slightly in that whole talent row. Something where it actually feels like a choice rather than you're kind of forced to play Breath of Sindragosa. I could be by myself in here on the Frost thing. If you like Frost DK the way it is, this should be a decent buff. What I think they should do is they should do a complete rework on it, maybe try to look back to previous expansions where Obliterate builds were a lot stronger and Frost had more direct damage through Obliterates rather than through many different sources with very, very little damage, but when combined together it creates a chunky output. And finally, I want to talk about some of the things I think Blizzard should go into the future for BFA 8.2. The patch is looking great. There's going to be a lot of content. Najjatar, Mechagon, I mean, the amount of stuff there's to do is going to be absolutely insane. But so far, BFA hasn't done nothing crazy with a lot of the classes. Not a lot of class changes, not a lot of adaptations. They've added a few Azeroth traits here and there, but most of the classes are performing amazing, like Shadow Priests, Boomkins, Elemental Shamans, most of the specs of Rogue. All these guys are doing just fine, as they have been from basically the beginning of the game. Oh, Warlocks also included. But then you have certain specs that are not that great in, let's say, something like dungeons. Okay, not everybody is going to be good in dungeons. Then there's specs that are not great in raids. Yeah, some fights are just not designed for certain classes. Then you have certain classes that are simply not that great, or specs, I guess rather, in PvP. And it's like, yeah, you know, Marksman, Hunter, and stuff like that comes to your head. But then there's certain specs that are not good at any of these. Now, everybody's gonna have a different opinion on it, but when it comes to taking a look at WoW Warlogs, then Radar IO, and then PvP brackets, you get to see which specs are often played and which ones are not. There's definitely certain specs that feel like they haven't been feeling any of the developer love in a while, so I kind of just want to point out some of those specs in here, just as an opinion piece, what I think could be better, what I think could be improved upon, and then maybe hopefully we'll see some changes to those specializations in the future. Subtlety rogues have been amazing at the beginning with Old Deer. The amount of AoE damage you're able to get from other adds fuels your single target. Ever since Blizzard got it that for PvE, this simply hasn't been the best spec. Right now it's between Assassination for single target and Outlaw for any cleave, any AoE, any burst AoE situation. So Subtlety just doesn't have a niche. It doesn't have anything that it's good at, that it's better at other specs, except in PvP. Subtlety is great at PvP because of all the CC. Your damage is, it's okay. You have on-demand cooldowns, but they don't really hit all too hard. I mean, you have on-demand damage when you need to, but when it comes to, let's say, the absurd damage that Assassination does in PvP, Subtlety just can't compare. While the spec is great for PvP, it definitely could use some love for PvE. Survival Hunters have been really weird. They are great for PvP, just the playstyle of the dots and the pets and all that lines up really well when it comes to player versus player combat. But in PvE, they have like a really weird, just train the living hell out of your target for boss fights when it comes to AoE situations like Mythic Plus dungeons. You might as well play Beastmaster or Marksman. I feel like they definitely could look at survival a little bit better. It feels like you are pigeonholed into running certain talents, and if Blizzard can maybe buff some of the other talents in the same row and maybe help the specs out a little bit, you know, take certain talents that nobody ever plays in dungeons or raids or whatever, I feel like that could definitely help improve the specs. Frost Death Knight, I think we talked about that already, but more consistency, maybe a more obliterate heavy playstyle would open a lot more playability and flexibility and functionality for majority of your talents. A lot of the talents, like in the last row with Breath and Zaragoza, simply just don't get used unless in very unique key situations. Also, Frost Death Knights, most of their spec-specific Azeroth traits are absolutely garbage. When it comes to how much they sim for damage, they actually end up, most of them, ranking fairly low. So when it comes to getting your new Azeroth gear, the first ring is always going to be spec specific, and then the second ring is going to be either spec specific or a neutral option. So current spec specific ones are pretty bad, and I think that definitely doesn't help the spec whatsoever. Enhancement Shaman is the last one. I love me some Enhancement Shaman. I want to make it work, but no matter what I do, it just feels like I don't really have that great of AoE. It feels like my single target is kind of okay. It feels like I have to put more effort into the spec when it comes to my gear, my traits, my everything, in order to just keep up and be, you know, kind of in the average field with some of the other specs. Enhancement is one spec I never see in raids, never see in dungeons, and barely see in PvP. I really hope that whatever changes that come to in the future, I really hope Blizzard considers taking a look at enhancement some more for patch 8.2. And I think that concludes my wish list of some of the specs that I would want for Blizzard to take a second look at for 8.2. I'm not asking for buffs, I'm not asking for nerfs, I'm not asking for rework, although some of them would be great. I'm just asking for somebody to take a look at it. If they even add any changes to any of these specs, maybe certain damage tunings, maybe change up a few talents, maybe add them some Azeroth traits, you know, take out some of the Azeroth traits that nobody wants and just aren't that great, and give them something where they could actually find some use for it, I think would be a much better system. Don't really know exactly how Blizzard is going to go about doing this, and I'm not really here to tell anybody how to do their job. but I am still just gonna keep my hopes up for something cool to come up in the future for these specs. If you guys want to let me know in the comments below which specs would you want for Blizzard to take a look at, if you were to make a wish list of your own, that would be great for me to read that. If you guys want to share it in the description, maybe you think warriors need adjustment, paladins, windwalkers, maybe Destro warlocks need another buff, but those are so as good as they are right now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.